Danny did not sleep well that night. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible outcome of what he had done. The handbook listed 17 different ways a Kalori could respond to a personal insult. 12 of them involved physical violence. 3 involved formal challenges that ended in physical violence. 1 involved a ritual shaming ceremony that, while not violent, was described in the handbook as psychologically devastating. The last one was simply labeled exile from all future contact, which honestly sounded like the best option at this point. But the next morning, nothing happened. Savara arrived at the diplomatic meeting at exactly the scheduled time. She sat in her chair with perfect posture, her full ceremonial armor back in place, and proceeded to discuss border patrol agreements with Commander Pruitt as if the previous night had not occurred. She did not look at Danny. She did not reference him. She did not send her guards to drag him to the airlock. Danny sat in his corner, translating quietly, and waited for the other shoe to drop. It did not drop that day, or the next day, or the day after that, but something had changed. Danny was not imagining it. He noticed small things, the kind of things you only catch when you spend all day watching someone because you are terrified they might kill you. Savara's eyes would find him across the conference table. Not a glare, not a threat, just a look, quick, almost accidental, before she turned back to whoever was speaking. It happened once, then twice, then every meeting. Danny started counting. By the 5th day she had looked at him 11 times during a single 2-hour session. There were other things too. When Danny entered a room, Savara's posture would shift. It was subtle, barely visible, but he was trained to notice body language across species. She would straighten slightly, pull her shoulders back, angle her jaw crest a fraction of a degree higher. The handbook described that particular gesture, the jaw crest adjustment, as a grooming behavior. It was something Kalori did in private, before important events, or when they wanted to look their best. The fact that she was doing it when he walked into a room made Danny's brain short-circuit every time he noticed it. He tried to apologize on the 4th day. He caught her in the corridor between meetings, stepped in front of her, which was brave or idiotic, depending on your perspective, and said, "War Captain, about what I said the other night, I want to—" "There is nothing to discuss, Lieutenant," she said, and walked past him so fast that her 2 guards had to jog to keep up. Danny stood in the empty corridor and let out a long breath. He tried again on the 5th day, this time in writing. He spent an hour composing a formal apology on his datapad, carefully following the Kalori template for expressions of regret, and left it at her station before the morning meeting. She returned the datapad that evening. At the bottom of his message, she had written a single line of Kalori script. Danny took it back to his quarters and spent 20 minutes translating it. "Your words require no correction." He read the sentence 5 times. He read it forward. He read it backward. He tried to parse it through every grammatical and cultural lens he knew. The sentence could mean, "Your apology is accepted." It could also mean, "What you said was accurate." In Kalori, the difference between the 2 interpretations depended on a vocal inflection that did not translate to written text. Danny needed help. He found Ensign Katie Voss in the xenobiology lab the next morning. Katie was small, sharp-eyed, and had a gift for making complicated alien biology sound like gossip. She also had no filter, which meant she was the one person on the ship Danny could talk to without worrying about professionalism. "You did what?" Katie said. I called her cute, the war captain. Yes, the 7-foot alien warrior with bone armor and claws. Yes, Danny, I know. Katie leaned back in her chair and laughed. She laughed for a long time. She laughed until her face was red and she had to hold on to her desk to keep from falling over. Danny sat across from her and waited patiently, because he deserved this, and he knew it. When she finally calmed down, she pulled up the Kalori cultural database on her terminal and started scrolling. Her expression changed as she read, shifting from amusement to curiosity to something that looked a lot like fascination. "Okay," she said. "The Kalori do not have a word for cute. Not even close. Their language has words for beauty, but they all mean something like inspiring awe or terrifying to look upon. In their culture, being called beautiful means you are so powerful and impressive that people cannot look away from you. It is a warrior compliment." "So cute is an insult," Danny said. "No, that is the weird part. If it were an insult, she would have challenged you on the spot. That is how Kalori work. Someone insults you, you fight them. It is simple, but she did not do that. She froze." Katie looked at him with wide eyes. "Danny, I think you genuinely confused her. I think her brain received input it had no category for. No Kalori has ever been called cute in the entire recorded history of their species. You basically gave her an error message." "Great," Danny said. "I crashed an alien." "You really did." Meanwhile, the Kalori guards had taken an interest in Danny. Two of them, large, silent warriors who normally treated humans like they were invisible, had started appearing near him at meals. They did not speak to him at first. They just watched, sitting at a nearby table, their copper eyes tracking his movements with the careful attention of researchers observing a new species. On the sixth day, the larger of the two, a scarred veteran named Torek, walked up to Danny in the mess hall. He towered over Danny by more than 2 feet. His voice was deep enough to rattle the silverware. "You," Torek said, "small human." Danny looked up from his food. "Yes? What did you say to the war captain?" Danny hesitated. "I would rather not." "She has changed," Torek said. It was not a question. "She checks her armor more often. She adjusts her crest before entering rooms where you are present. Last night, I heard her say a human word to herself. She said it several times, as if practicing." Danny's mouth went dry. "What word?" Torek looked at him with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been respect. It was hard to tell with Kalori. "Cute," he said. Then he turned and walked away, shaking his head, making a low, rumbling sound that Danny's translator could only interpret as unprecedented. Danny sat alone in the mess hall, his food forgotten, his heart doing something strange and fast in his chest. He thought about Savara, standing at the viewport, glowing in the light of a nebula. He thought about her freezing at a single word. He thought about a 7-foot warrior practicing the word cute alone in her quarters. He was in trouble. The second week on the ardent horizon was harder than the first. The diplomatic talks had expanded beyond simple trade agreements. A territorial dispute between the Kalori and the Vren, the insectoid species that controlled a neighboring sector, had been simmering for months, and the Galactic Council had decided that this meeting was the right time and place to deal with it. Commander Pruitt was not happy about this. Nobody was happy about this. Mediating between two species that genuinely wanted to destroy each other was not what the ardent horizon had been designed for. Danny was buried in work. He spent 18 hours a day translating proposals, counter-proposals, and responses that were technically diplomatic, but felt a lot like threats wrapped in fancy words. His quarters looked like a disaster zone. Data pads stacked everywhere, coffee cups growing colonies of something he did not want to think about, and a growing pile of laundry that he kept promising himself he would deal with tomorrow. On the 9th night, he was in the observation lounge again. Not by choice. His quarters were too cluttered to think in, and the lounge was the only place on the ship that was quiet at this hour. He was slumped over the table, 3 empty coffee cups beside him, his uniform jacket hanging over the back of his chair, reading the same paragraph for the 4th time, because the words had stopped making sense about an hour ago. He did not hear the door open. "You work too much," said a voice behind him. Danny jumped so hard he knocked over a cup. It rolled off the table and hit the floor with a hollow sound. He turned around and found Savara standing just inside the doorway, watching him. Just the base layer, the dark, fitted undersuit that Kalori wore beneath their plating. Without the bulk of the ceremonial pieces, she looked different again. Still tall, still powerful, still covered in natural bone plating, but more relaxed, more real. "War Captain," Danny said, trying to straighten up and look like he had not been half asleep on a table. "I did not hear you come in. Sorry about the mess, Savara," she said. Danny stopped talking. "When we are not in formal session," she continued, "you may use my name." Danny stared at her. He knew what this meant. He had read the handbook 900 pages, cover to cover, and he knew that a Kalori officer offering their personal name to someone outside their species was not a small thing. It was trust. It was respect. Among Kalori, your name was not just a word, it was a part of you, something you gave only to those who had earned the right to carry it. "Okay," Danny said quietly. "Severa. Thank you." She sat down across from him. Not in the rigid, upright way she sat in meetings, spine straight, hands flat on the table, every inch the war captain. She leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table, and the violet lines along her jaw pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm that Danny had started to associate with calmness. "I have been thinking about what you said," she told him. Danny felt his stomach tighten. "Look, I really am sorry. It was completely out of line, and I should never have—" "You called me cute," she said. The way she said the word stopped him cold. She pronounced it carefully, slowly, like she was holding something small and fragile between her fingers and trying not to break it. There was no anger in her voice, just a strange, quiet kind of wonder, as if the word itself was something she had been turning over in her mind for days, examining it from every angle. "I have been called many things in my life," she said. "Fearsome, relentless, a blade without mercy. These are the words my people use for those who have proven themselves. In 32 cycles of service, no one has ever used the word you used. I did not know what to do with it. My mind went blank, like a system that receives a signal it was not built to process." "I can imagine," Danny said softly. "No," she said, "you cannot. Among my people, to be soft is to be weak. To be small is to be prey. Every word we use to describe worth is a word about power, about dominance, about making others afraid. And then you, a creature half my size, with no armor, no claws, no natural weapons of any kind, you looked at me, and you did not see a weapon. You saw something gentle." She paused, and the violet glow on her skin brightened for a moment. "It was the most disorienting moment of my life, more than my first battle, more than the day I earned my rank." Danny looked at her across the table. The observation lounge was quiet. The nebula had faded behind them days ago, and now the viewport showed only open space, distant stars scattered like dust across black glass. He thought about what to say. He thought about diplomacy and protocols, and the 900 pages of rules that told him how to interact with Kalori officers. And then he threw all of it away and said the only honest thing he could. "For what it is worth," he said, "where I come from, being called cute is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean weak. It doesn't mean small. It means that someone looks at you and feels something warm. Not fear, not awe, just warmth. Like you are someone they want to be around, not someone they need to run from." Savara did not move. Her copper eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow was not. "Warmth," she repeated. The words sounded different in her voice, deeper, rougher, but also careful, as if she was learning it for the first time. "Your species has a word for what it feels like to not be afraid of someone." "We have a lot of words for it," Danny said. "Warm, safe, comfortable, At ease. We do not, Savara said. We have words for the absence of threat, but they are tactical terms. Clinical, they describe a situation, not a feeling. She looked down at her own hands, large, clawed, built for violence, and then back at him. You have given me a feeling I do not have a word for. That is a very strange gift, Danny Castillo. It was the first time she had used his full name. It sounded different coming from her, heavier and more deliberate, as if she was giving each syllable the weight it deserved. She stood up suddenly, the way she always did, fast, decisive, like sitting still for too long made her uncomfortable. Danny expected her to leave immediately, the way she had before, but this time she paused at the door. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, the violet lines on her skin glowing steadily in the dim light of the lounge. "Good night, Danny," she said, without turning around. Then she stepped through the door and was gone. Danny sat in the empty lounge for a long time after that. He did not go back to his translation work. He did not drink his cold coffee. He just sat there, looking at the chair where she had been sitting, thinking about a 7-foot warrior who had never been told she was warm, and who had looked at him, a small, tired, coffee-stained human, like he had just shown her a color she had never seen before. When he finally went back to his quarters, he found that he could not stop smiling. He told himself it was the caffeine. He knew it was not. The mediation with the Vren fell apart on day 14. It had been going badly for a while. The Vren ambassador, a tall insectoid creature with shiny black eyes and mandibles that clicked when he was angry, had accused the Kalori of expanding their patrols into neutral space. Severa had responded by calling the ambassador a venomless coward, which was about the worst thing you could say to a Vren. Within seconds, both delegations were on their feet. Weapons were half-drawn. Voices were raised. The air in the conference room felt like it was about to catch fire. Commander Pruitt managed to call a recess before anyone started shooting. But the damage was done. Trust was broken. The Vren refused to return to the table. The Kalori were furious. And Danny, who had been translating the whole thing in real time, sat in his chair with a headache that felt like someone had parked a shuttle on his skull. The next 24 hours were a mess of emergency meetings, back-channel communications, and frantic attempts to stop the whole situation from turning into a shooting war. Danny barely slept. Nobody did. On the morning of day 15, everything got worse. Danny was walking through the lower decks, heading toward the communications room with a stack of translated documents, when the alarms went off. Red lights flashed along the corridor walls. The ship's alert system blared a warning. Security breach, docking bay 7, all personnel clear the area immediately. Danny stopped. Docking bay 7 was where the Kalori shuttle was parked. He could hear sounds coming from that direction. The sharp crack of energy weapons, the high-pitched shriek of Vren war cries, and underneath it all, the deep, bone-shaking roar of Kalori in combat. He should have run the other way. Every protocol, every regulation, every ounce of common sense told him to get as far from docking bay 7 as possible, and let the security teams handle it. He was not a fighter. He was a translator. The most dangerous thing he had ever done was eat expired food from the mess hall. But then he pulled up the security feed on a wall terminal, and his blood went cold. The feed showed docking bay 7 in chaos. A group of Vren, not the diplomatic team, but hardliners, extremists who must have smuggled weapons past the checkpoint, had stormed the bay. They were trying to seize the Kalori shuttle, probably to use it as leverage, or maybe just to prove a point. The Kalori guards were fighting back, and they were winning, because Kalori always won in close combat. But Savara was in there. She had been inspecting the shuttle when the attack started. Danny could see her on the feed, fighting with her bare hands because she had not been carrying a weapon. She had already put 2 Vren on the ground. But more were coming, and they had disruptor-class weapons, the kind that could crack Kalori bone plating. She was unarmored, she was outnumbered, and as Danny watched, a disruptor blast caught her across the left arm, and she staggered. Danny did not think. He just moved. Later, when people asked him what had gone through his mind in that moment, he could not give them an honest answer, because nothing had gone through his mind. His brain had stepped aside entirely, and something older and dumber had taken over. Some ancient human instinct that did not care about size or strength or the odds, that only knew one thing. Someone he cared about was in danger, and he was not going to stand here and watch. He ran toward Docking Bay 7. He was not armed. He was not armored. He weighed 160 pounds. His most dangerous skill was being able to conjugate Kalori verbs in the passive subjunctive. But he had one thing going for him. He had read the ship's technical manual almost as carefully as he had read the diplomatic handbook. And he knew something about Docking Bay 7 that the Vren did not. The bay had an emergency atmospheric cycling system. It was designed for hull breach scenarios. If the outer doors were compromised, the system could rapidly change the air pressure inside the bay to equalize with space. It could also be triggered manually from a control panel on the far wall. A partial pressure drop would not kill anyone, but it would disorient the Vren badly. Their species had extremely sensitive auditory organs that reacted violently to sudden changes in atmospheric pressure. A quick drop would hit them like a punch to the head. Danny came through the side entrance at a full sprint. The bay was a war zone. Overturned cargo containers, scorch marks on the walls, 3 Vren on the ground, and more still fighting. He could see the control panel on the far wall, maybe 50 meters away. He just had to get there. He ran. He dodged behind a cargo container as a disruptor blast scorched the air where his head had been. He vaulted over a fallen crate, slipped on something wet, caught himself, kept running. A Vren soldier spotted him, small, unarmed, obviously human, and raised a weapon. Danny saw the barrel come up. He saw the glow of the charging disruptor. He had time to think one single crystal-clear thought. This was a really stupid way to die. The shot never came. Savara appeared from the side like a storm given a body. She hit the Vren soldier with a strike so hard that the creature flew sideways and went through a bulkhead panel with a crash that Danny felt in his teeth. She stood there for a half-second, breathing hard, violet blood dripping from the wound on her arm, her copper eyes blazing with something that was beyond anger. She looked at Danny. "What are you doing here?" she snarled. "Saving your life, hopefully," Danny said, and slammed his hand down on the emergency cycling switch. The effect was immediate. The air in the bay shifted. Danny felt it in his ears, a sudden pop, followed by a wave of pressure change that made his vision blur for a second. The Vren felt it 100 times worse. They staggered, grabbing at their heads, their sensitive organs overwhelmed by the rapid change. Some of them dropped their weapons. Some of them dropped to the floor. The Kalori guards, whose species was barely affected by pressure changes, moved in fast and had every Vren subdued within 30 seconds. Then it was over. Danny was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He was shaking. His hands would not stop shaking. There was blood on his uniform. Not his, someone else's. He did not know whose. And his heart was beating so fast that it felt less like a heartbeat and more like a continuous vibration. He looked up, and Savara was standing over him. She was hurt. The gash on her arm was deep, leaking dark violet fluid, but she was standing, and she was alive. And right now, that was the only thing Danny cared about. She looked down at him for a long time. Her expression was something Danny had never seen on a Kalori face before. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was something raw and open and unguarded. Something that looked a lot like the way humans looked when they were feeling too much to put into words. "You are the most reckless creature I have ever encountered," she said. Her voice was rough. "Yeah," Danny managed. "I get that a lot." Savara crouched in front of him. She moved slowly, carefully, the way you move when you are trying not to scare something small. She reached out with one hand, large, clawed, built for breaking things, and touched the side of his face. The touch was so light, Danny almost could not feel it. Just the tips of her fingers against his cheek, barely there, like she was afraid she might hurt him if she pressed any harder. It was the gentlest thing Danny had ever felt from anyone, human or otherwise. "You are also," she said, very quietly, "the bravest." Then she stood, turned, and walked toward her guards to begin organizing the aftermath. She did not look back. Danny stayed on the floor for a while longer. His heart was still racing. His face was burning where she had touched it. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but something else had started. A feeling in his chest, warm and heavy and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you didn't want to step back. He was in trouble. He was in so much trouble. The days after the docking bay incident were a blur of reports, investigations, and diplomatic cleanup. The Vren hardliners were arrested and locked in the brig. The Vren ambassador, who swore up and down that he had nothing to do with the attack, issued a formal apology to both the Kylori delegation and the crew of the Ardent Horizon. Whether he was telling the truth did not matter much. His people had attacked a Kylori war captain on neutral ground, and that was the kind of mistake that could start wars. But the war did not come. The mediation resumed 2 days later, and this time it went differently. The Vren were embarrassed and cooperative. The Kylori were still angry, but willing to talk. And Savara, who had every right to demand blood and punishment, chose restraint. She negotiated firmly, but fairly, and by the end of the third session, both sides had agreed to terms that nobody loved, but everybody could live with. Commander Pruitt called it a miracle. Danny called it proof that Savara was a lot more than a warrior. Danny received a commendation for his actions in the docking bay. Commander Pruitt presented it to him in her office, shook his hand, and told him that if he ever did anything that stupid again, she would personally throw him out of an airlock. She was smiling when she said it, but Danny was not entirely sure she was joking. The Kylori recognized him too. On the morning of day 18, Torek appeared at Danny's quarters. The scarred guard stood in the doorway, filling it completely, and held out a small disc of dark metal. It was engraved with patterns that Danny recognized as Kylori military script. "For courage beyond your form," Torek said. "The Vanguard remembers." It was warm in his hand, warmer than it should have been, as if it held some kind of energy inside it. He turned it over and saw his name engraved on the back, not in English, but in Kylori script, spelled out carefully, each character precise. "Thank you," Danny said. Torek looked at him for a moment, and then did something unexpected. He placed his fist against his own chest, the Kylori salute of respect, and dipped his head. "You are small," Torek said, "but you are not weak. The war captain was right about you." Before Danny could ask what Savara had said, Torek turned and walked away. Danny kept the disc in his pocket after that. He liked the warmth of it against his leg, a constant reminder that something real had happened, that he had not dreamed the whole thing. The Kylori delegation was scheduled to depart on day 20. The final diplomatic sessions wrapped up smoothly. Hands were shaken, carefully in the case of the Kylori, whose grip could crush human bones without effort. Commander Pruitt hosted a farewell dinner that was tense but polite, and by the end of the evening, The two species had managed something that looked almost like mutual respect. Danny kept his distance from Savara during the official events. He did not know where they stood. He did not know what the touch in the docking bay had meant, or whether it meant anything at all, or whether he was reading too much into the behavior of a species he had only studied from books. So he stayed in his corner, did his job, and tried not to think about the fact that she was leaving in 12 hours. On the final night, he went to the observation lounge. He did not expect to find her there. He had gone because it was the only quiet place on the ship, and because the viewport was showing a star field that reminded him of the nebula they had passed through on that first night, and because he wanted to sit somewhere familiar and feel whatever he was feeling without anyone watching. But she was there. Savara stood at the viewport in her full ceremonial armor. Every piece was polished and in place: the heavy shoulder guards, the chest plate, the gauntlets with their reinforced knuckles. She looked like a war captain, every inch of her built for command, for battle, for the kind of life where softness was a luxury no one could afford. She also looked, Danny thought as he walked through the door, a little sad. "Hey," he said. She turned her head. The violet lines on her skin pulsed once, bright, and then settled into a steady glow. "Hey," she said. It was a human word. She did not dress it up in formal language or filter it through diplomatic protocol. She just said it, short and simple, the way any person would say it to someone they were glad to see. It sounded strange in her deep voice. It sounded right. Danny walked over and stood beside her at the viewport. The stars stretched out in front of them, cold and endless and beautiful in the way that only empty space could be. They were quiet for a while. Danny liked that about Savara. She did not fill silence with noise. She let it sit there, let it breathe, and it never felt uncomfortable. "I want you to know," she said finally, "that in 32 cycles of service, no one has ever made me feel the way you did in this room, on that first night." Danny glanced at her, confused and mildly horrified. The sound she made was unlike anything he had ever heard from a Kalori. It was short, rough, startled, a bark of noise that came from deep in her chest. It took Danny 3 full seconds to realize what it was. She was laughing. A Kalori war captain was laughing at his joke. In all the cultural databases, in all the diplomatic records, in all the centuries of contact between humans and Kalori, Danny was fairly sure this had never happened before. "Seen," she said, when the laughter faded. Her voice was softer now, or as soft as a voice like hers could get. "You made me feel seen. Not as a weapon, not as a title, not as something to fear or obey. You looked at me and you saw something I did not know was there." She turned to face him fully. "Among my people, there is a word, Valeth. It does not translate well into your language. The closest meaning is something like the one who shows you your own reflection for the first time. It is the most intimate word in our language. It is spoken once in a lifetime, if it is spoken at all." Danny's throat felt tight. "I am not saying it," she told him. And then, and this was the part that Danny would replay in his mind for years afterward, the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, just enough. It was not quite a smile, because Kalori did not smile the way humans did. But it was close. It was so close. "Not yet. But I want you to know that the word exists, and that I have never thought about saying it to anyone before I met you." She reached into a compartment on her armor and took out a small object. It was a pendant, dark metal, like the disc Torek had given him, but finer, more delicate. It was shaped like a teardrop, and etched with patterns that glowed faintly with violet light. The glow pulsed in a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. "This is a Kalith mark," she said. "It tells any Kalori who sees it that you are under my personal protection, that you are mine to guard, that harming you would be the same as challenging me directly." She placed it in his hand. "Always." Danny held the pendant carefully. It was warm, just like the disk, but the warmth was deeper, steadier, like holding a hand. "Thank you. I do not know what to say." "You never do," Savara said, "and yet you always say the right thing." She straightened, and for a moment she was the war captain again, tall, armored, untouchable. But then she looked at him one more time, and the violet light on her skin flared brighter than Danny had ever seen it, bright enough to cast soft purple shadows across both of them, bright enough to light up the whole room. "Also," she said, "I have decided that I do not mind the word." Danny blinked. "What word?" She leaned down, all 7 feet of her, bending at the waist, until her face was level with his. Her copper eyes were close enough that Danny could see the tiny flecks of gold in them, like sparks caught in amber. Her breath was warm against his skin. "Cute," she said. Then she straightened, turned on her heel, and walked out of the observation lounge with the precise, measured stride of a Kalori war captain. Boots heavy on the deck plates, armor gleaming, every step controlled and deliberate and perfect. Danny stood at the viewport, holding a glowing pendant that pulsed against his palm like a second heartbeat. The stars shone outside. The lounge was quiet and empty, and full of the lingering warmth of violet light. He was grinning. He could not stop grinning. He stood there like that for a long time, alone with the stars and the warmth in his hand, and the memory of a word she had almost said. And he thought that the galaxy was a far stranger and more wonderful place than any handbook, any database, any 900 pages of rules could ever describe. Somewhere on the other side of the ship, a Kalori war captain walked to her shuttle with a glow on her skin that her guards had never seen before. And when Torek asked if everything was in order, she said, yes. And for the first time in 32 cycles, she meant it in every possible way. Danny Castillo had never wanted to be the center of attention. He was a linguistics specialist, not a soldier, not a hero, and definitely not the kind of guy who started problems with alien warriors who could snap him in half like a dry stick. But life on the deep space vessel Ardent Horizon had a funny way of putting him exactly where he did not want to be. He had been on the ship for 3 months when the Kalori arrived. Everyone on board knew the Kalori by reputation. They were one of the most feared species in the known galaxy. Tall, covered in natural bone-like armor plating, with eyes that burned like liquid copper and voices so deep they vibrated in your chest. Every species gave them space. Diplomats got nervous around them. Generals looked at the floor. Even the insectoid Vren, who were afraid of almost nothing, went quiet when a Kalori walked into a room. The delegation that came aboard was led by War Captain Savara Kine. She was nearly 7 feet tall, with dark gray-plated skin and streaks of soft violet light that ran along her jaw and down her neck. Those streaks glowed faintly, like something alive just under the surface. When she walked through the corridors of the ship, people pressed themselves against the walls to let her pass. She moved like a weapon that had learned to walk. Danny was assigned as the human cultural liaison for the visit. This was not because he was brave or impressive. It was because he was the only person on the ship who had actually read the entire Kalori diplomatic handbook. All 900 pages of it. Commander Lisa Pruitt, who ran the diplomatic side of things, needed someone who could handle translation and cultural issues. Danny was that someone, whether he liked it or not. The first 3 days were tense, but nothing went wrong. During the formal meetings, she spoke only to Commander Pruitt and treated Danny like a piece of furniture. He fetched documents, corrected translations, and sat quietly in the corner, while warriors and diplomats talked about borders and trade routes and things that were far above his pay grade. He did not mind being ignored. In fact, he preferred it. The less a 7-foot alien killing machine noticed him, the better. On the evening of the third day, everything changed. Danny was alone in the observation lounge, a large room with a wide viewport that looked out into space. They were passing through a nebula at the time, and the view was something else. Swirls of purple and blue and gold, clouds of gas and dust that stretched for light years. Danny sat at a small table near the window, reviewing translation notes on his betapad, a half-empty coffee cup beside him. He heard the door open, but did not look up right away. He assumed it was Katie Voss, his friend from xenobiology, who sometimes came up here to watch the stars after her shift. It was not Katie. Savara Kine walked to the viewport and stood there, staring out at the nebula. She had removed the heavy ceremonial shoulder armor she wore during meetings. Without it, she looked different. The bone plating on her arms and torso was still there. It was part of her body, not something she could take off. But without the extra bulk of the armor, her shape was leaner, more natural. The violet streaks on her skin pulsed gently, picking up the colors of the nebula outside, as if her body was responding to the light. Danny looked up from his datapad. He should have looked back down. He should have kept his mouth shut. He should have done literally anything other than what he did next. But Danny Castillo had a problem. His mouth worked faster than his brain. It always had. His mother used to say he was born talking and never learned when to stop. And in that moment, sitting in the low light of the observation lounge, looking at this towering alien warrior, standing quietly by the window, without her armor, glowing softly in the light of a nebula, his mouth decided to go ahead and ruin his life. "Huh," he said, almost to himself. "You're actually kind of cute without all that armor." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Danny had ever heard. The hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade. The nebula outside kept swirling, indifferent to the disaster unfolding inside the lounge. Danny could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the gravity generators working 3 decks below. He could hear with terrible clarity the sound of his own career ending. Savara turned her head, slowly, the way a predator turns toward movement. Her copper eyes locked onto him, and they did not blink. Her entire body had gone still, not the controlled stillness of a soldier at attention, but the frozen stillness of a person whose brain had just hit a wall it did not know how to get past. She stared at him. Danny stared back. His brain, which had been on a coffee break while his mouth did its thing, finally showed up to work. It took one look at the situation and immediately started screaming. He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, to say he was sorry, that it was a joke, that he did not mean it, that he absolutely did not just call a decorated Kalori war captain cute to her face in an empty room on a spaceship in the middle of nowhere. But before he could get a single word out, Savara turned away from him, walked to the door, and left. She did not say a word. She did not growl. She did not threaten him. She did not rip his arms off, which, according to the handbook, was a thing Kalori could do and occasionally did when they were angry enough. She simply left, and the door slid shut behind her, and Danny was alone in the observation lounge with the nebula and his coffee, and the dawning realization that he had just done something that no human being in the history of galactic relations had ever been stupid enough to do. He sat there for a long time. The nebula kept swirling. His coffee went cold. Danny put his head on the table and closed his eyes. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this was going to get a lot worse before it got better.